welcome back to part 2 of my ACE tutorial series, in which I'll create a mono lead patch with filters running in parallel. I'll start from the initialize preset again, but this time I'm going to dial in a touch of glide, otherwise known as portamento, and switch the glide mode from rate to time, so glides are the same length regardless of the interval between the notes I play. I want a monophonic sound, so I'll click the mode menu at the top left, but I'll choose the legato mono mode, so the glides only occur when notes overlap. Now let's take a look at the oscillators again, this time focusing on the differences between them. For example, oscillator 1 can be switched to a pair of softer sounding waveforms, with a peak wave on the left side of the knob and a triangle on the right. Oscillator 1 also has a sub-oscillator with its own dedicated output and a hardwired connection to the second knob in the mixer. The sub-oscillator tracks the pitch of oscillator 1 and provides a square wave an octave lower, or 2 octaves lower, or a pulse wave 2 octaves lower. So let's turn the sub-oscillator back down for now, crossfade all the way to oscillator 2, and look at the 3 knobs at the bottom, all of which allow you to link the 2 oscillators in different ways. Let's start with the cross knob to the right. Turning this up cross-modulates the pitch of oscillator 2 with oscillator 1, and results in a range of dirty, atonal, inharmonic timbres. This is actually exactly the same as wiring the output of oscillator 1 to the pitch modulation input of oscillator 2, and turning up the depth knob. Okay, let's jump over to the left. Ring stands for ring modulation, and with this knob fully up, the output of oscillator 2 is actually both oscillators multiplied together. Tuning one of the oscillators moves the resulting sidebands around, so it sounds like both oscillators are changing pitch by different amounts. I could create the same effect by connecting oscillator 2 to one of the left-hand pins of a multiplier, then wiring oscillator 1 to the mod input. Finally, we have a sync knob in the middle. Turning this up doesn't seem to have much effect at first, until I tune oscillator 2 higher than oscillator 1. Oscillator 2 is now being reset every time oscillator 1 crosses 0, so it's forced to the same pitch as oscillator 1, and tuning it higher just changes the waveform and sweeps extra harmonics around in interesting ways. I can create more extreme effects by switching the tuning mode to partial and tuning the oscillator according to the harmonic series and over a wider range. And you may wish to right-click the knob and MIDI learn it to a hardware controller, or automate it from your DAW. Interestingly, turning the sync knob down a bit results in a type of soft sync in which 0 crossings from oscillator 1 only cause partial resets in oscillator 2. And the result is a bit less predictable and sounds a little more organic. Of course, we can also modulate the oscillator pitch. Let's turn up the pitch modulation knob to modulate it from envelope 2, and turn the sustain down and the decay up to create a slow downward sweep for every note. However, I don't want the modulation to be the same for every note I play, so let's override the default connection by dragging a wire from LFO 2. Let's slow down the rate and set the reset parameter to free, so the LFO sweeps continuously and doesn't restart for each note. Okay, let's soften this tone a little by blending it with some triangle wave from oscillator 1, and thicken it with some sub-oscillator, and maybe a tiny touch of white noise. And I'll move on to the filter. Let's turn down the cutoff, add about 50% key tracking, and turn up the first modulation knob to modulate it from envelope 2. I want a plucky attack for each note, so I'll turn down the decay time. And I might also turn on snap mode, which changes the envelope shape to make it more percussive. As before, I'm going to turn up the velocity knob, so the intensity of the pluck is related to how hard I hit the key. But this time I'm also going to turn up the knob to its left, labelled fall rise rate. The envelope's sustain stage now rises gradually rather than remaining at a static value. So the filter now opens back up after each pluck is finished. And as we're in legato rather than mono mode, the envelopes don't re-trigger when notes overlap. So I can follow each pluck with gliding legato melodies. This sound is crying out for a touch of vibrato. So let's turn up the vibrato knob in the oscillator 2 section. This actually modulates the pitch of both oscillators 1 and 2, using LFO1 as the modulation source. It doesn't sound much like vibrato at the moment, however. So let's set LFO1 to Hertz mode, so it remains at a constant frequency. And for a vibrato effect, we need a rate pretty close to 5 Hz. And the modulation depth needs to be set quite low. Actually, I'm going to turn the LFO level all the way down and turn up the modulation knob below it instead. And I can now introduce vibrato using the mod wheel in the traditional fashion. So let's incorporate some extra filtering from filter 2. There are a number of ways I could do this. For example, if I patch the main output of filter 1 to the input of filter 2 and turn VCA1 down and VCA2 up instead, we're now hearing both filters running in series. Let's also drag a wire from the second output of filter 2, labelled high pass, and override the default connection for VCA2. So we now have a low pass filter followed by a high pass filter. Alternatively, I could patch filter 2 from the mixer output instead, and turn VCA1 back up again. So we're now hearing both filters in parallel. If you want, you can also make an explicit connection from the mixer to filter 1, to make it easier to see at a glance that both filters have the same input signal. And if I click the input of filter 2 and drag a wire back to the input of filter 1, I can chain those inputs together, which looks a little neater. Let's switch filter 2's second output to bandpass mode instead of high pass. Dial in some resonance and a touch of modulation. And tune it to add some extra vowel-like formants in the mid-range. I'm also going to wire filter 1 back to the extra input at the bottom of the mixer. Turning this up creates a feedback loop around filter 1. Unlike the classic trick of wiring an analog synth to its own external input, makes the sound thicker and warmer. I'm nearly finished with this preset now, but I'll make a little final tweak in the tweak panel. The circuit bending section allows us to add some extra analog-like imperfections to the sound. For example, turning up the slop parameter introduces extra tuning instabilities, similar to the drift setting at the top, but different for each oscillator as well as each voice. Or we may like the sound of oscillators with aging, leaky capacitors, which we can emulate by turning up the os cap failure knob. And finally, my favourite crosstalk parameter, which allows signals to leak between modules, with interesting and often surprising results. Small amounts of crosstalk can often help to add character, with multiple subtle feedback loops bringing an unpredictable, organic quality to a sound. That's all I've got time for in this video. Look out for the next part, which will include more complicated patching examples, incorporating the ramp generator and multiplier modules at the bottom, and which will also start to examine the more esoteric options in the tweak page. Thanks for watching.